The skies today are a dead giveaway that we're not taping this section of the video the same day as the main part. But today we're reintroducing you to Jimmy from the Highway Orchid Society. He's an amazing speaker and is able to get his point across in a way that's easy to understand. So let's have a listen to him and his sage advice on what to do once you've bought that new orchid. And if there's any further information you need on the topics and the orchids he's covered in this discussion, please have a check through our channel. There's lots of orchid videos related to a lot of the different things that he covered, and they go into more detail. So be sure to check those out. Or if you prefer written content, have a look down at that Buy Me a Coffee link. Ed posts up articles there all the time that are freely available to everyone. So be sure to go check that out. That link is in the description box below.
First of all, thanks for supporting the show. It's good to see so many people here. I'm glad hope you're enjoying it. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about how to look after your new orchid. So presumably some of you have now either been looking and wanting to buy an orchid if you haven't got one, or have bought one, either from Woolworths or Checkers or from the show or elsewhere, and how to look after this thing. Okay, so orchids are different to normal plants. They're still plants, but they have slightly specialized requirements. So first of all, you've bought this orchid, you need to understand what type of orchid you've bought. Okay, there are about 30,000 different orchid species in the world, so it's a very large, diverse plant family. There's also hundreds of thousands of orchid hybrids, okay, but they all have their origin in the orchid species. And they are grouped into major groups. And so you have probably, in all likelihood, bought one of these groups of orchids. Okay, so it's quite important to sort of know what you've bought. So these are cymbidiums. Okay, so cymbidium, I think most people know cymbidium, long, thin leaves like this, with flowers that look like that. Again, they come in various sizes. This is a miniature cymbidium. Sometimes the leaves are that long and the flower spikes are that long. Those are what they call the standard cymbidiums. Paphiopedilums are these types of plants here. Green leaf paphs, and you get mottled leaf paphs as well. I don't have an example here. The so-called lady slipper orchids. Okay. Then we get the familiar cattleya in various forms and shapes. Okay, this is a sort of a compact growing cattleya. The dendrobiums, a lot of people grow these in trees in this part of the world. Oncidiums, they typically have this type of bulb over here. Again, a large family of plants, various flower shapes and forms, but those are known as oncidiums. You get another family of dendrobiums, referred to as hard cane dendrobiums. I don't know why they're hard cane and soft cane. These are soft cane and those are hard cane. They're both equally hard to me. But I think what it refers to is that these canes eventually, when they grow long, they basically flop down like that. And so they grow on the side of a tree and they basically flop down like that. So those are soft cane dendrobiums, hard cane dendrobiums. And then vandas, another large family of this type. Okay, these sort of leaves. This is a vanda. So it's important to know what you've bought, because that is going to determine how you grow it. So the main growth factors, as with all plants, but particularly with orchids, are the temperature. What temperature range am I going to grow it in? How much light does it need? How much humidity does it need? Orchids also need air movement. That's a particular requirement of good orchid culture, is air movement, because normally they grow up on branches, attached to branches in trees. Okay, where the wind moves through the trees, so they always have a lot of air movement. Okay, so they're not scared of air movement. There are obviously those jungle floor growing plants which need less air movement, but as a general rule they need good air movement. They need a bit of fertilizer, and they need watering. Watering is the most important aspect of orchid growing. Okay, so I'll deal with that last. Okay, so first of all, temperature. Now here in this area, our temperatures range from about 5 degrees, winter low temperature. It was about that this morning when we came at 6 o'clock in the morning. going up to about 35 degrees. Okay. As you move down to Durban, your minimum temperature will probably be about 8 to 10 degrees, and the maximum similarly about 35 degrees. If you go up the coast, the winter minimum increases, it gets even warmer, you get maybe 10 or 12 degrees and so on. It gets warmer. If you head Maritzburg way, your minimum temperature is going to go down to about 1 or 2 degrees with a possibility of frost. Okay, so the first thing is you have to understand what temperature regime do these orchids grow in. Okay, because, and so we'll start here with the warm growing orchids. So the ones here on my left, these are the warm growing plants. Okay, so the vandas, these dendrobiums here, hard cane dendrobiums, the species involved in these come from sort of Indonesia, the Philippines, north of Australia as well. Particularly this type of dendrobium comes from the northern part of Australia where it is really, really hot. Okay, if you think Durban's hot, if you think Richards Bay is hot, they're not hot. You go to northern Australia, that's hot. Okay, so these are the warm growing, and of course these Phalaenopsis, okay, widely sold in the supermarkets. They are also warm to hot growing plants. They come from Borneo, Sumatra, the Philippines, all these tropical islands. Okay, so these are the warm growing species. Okay, then we have an intermediate temperature range. So these here will tend to grow well in intermediate conditions. Soft cane dendrobiums, cattleyas, oncidiums, and a whole lot of others as well. But these are the commonly cultivated species. So these are intermediate. And these are generally regarded as cool growing orchids. Can you hear me there at the back? Cool growing orchids. Okay. Particularly cymbidiums, I mean, they can take quite a lot of heat during the day, but they do like cool nights. Okay, so they need quite a big temperature range between day and night. Okay, so that's not always easy to do if you live in Durban or on the coast. There are some plants that will grow under those conditions, but generally cymbidiums would do well pretty much from the upper highway region up to Maritzburg and so on, where you have this larger drop in temperature between day and night, and the cool mornings and the cool nights, they in fact require that to grow and to flower. They'll grow, but to flower they require that. And these Paphiopedilums as well, they generally prefer cooler temperatures at night. Okay, so some of these might grow under these conditions or under intermediate conditions, but a lot of them won't flower successfully. So you have to identify what sort of, where do I live? What am I likely to be able to grow? So a lot of people who live up in Hillcrest, they really love these plants, but they try and grow them and you struggle because it's just not warm enough. It's just not warm enough, you know. So you've got to choose appropriately. The next thing is light requirements. How much light does it need? All plants need light. Orchids need a surprising amount of light. It's not like your average pot plant, which can sit in some dingy corner of your house where it gets very little light, and they will not survive under low light conditions. Okay, so they need a lot of light, but the right type of light. So again, let's just shuffle this around a bit. The dendrobiums, the vandas, these dendrobiums here, and cymbidiums are orchids which require high light conditions. And a lot of them will actually tolerate full morning sun under the right conditions. And in fact, some of them as well, usually when you get angry with them and they're not flowering, you just put them in full sun and see if they flower. Okay? So these plants now require high light. Now you can see the contrast. Cymbidiums require high light, but they like cool conditions, whereas these require high light and they like warm conditions. Okay, so you just got to understand that. And then intermediate conditions, again, the Cattleya family, Oncidia, these would also do well under intermediate light conditions. They're pretty flexible, these sort of plants. And then the low light plants are these here, Phalaenopsis, Paphs. These are jungle floor plants. They live on the floors of the jungles where they have the tree canopy overhead, so there's quite a lot of shade. Okay, they still like a bright light, a bright shade, but no direct sun. Okay, so that's the next thing you have to identify. What have I bought? Does it like warm, intermediate, or cool conditions? And does it like high light, intermediate, or low light conditions? So what do we mean by high light? Okay, so high light would be from full sun, full morning sun, or about 30% to 50% shade. Okay, that's easy to achieve if you have a shade cloth like you have above. You can buy a 50% or a 40% shade cloth, and that gives you then a defined amount of light. Intermediate conditions, the amount of light there is from 60% shade to 40% shade. Okay, that's that sort of intermediate group. And then here the low light conditions would be, say, from about 70%, 80% shade down to 100% bright shade. So those are the things where you live, you have to identify what sort of light conditions do I have? How can I give the plants these light conditions? Another requirement of orchids is humidity. They like a high ambient humidity. They are tropical plants, so they're not going to grow under cactus conditions or succulent conditions. They need a high ambient humidity, but that's not too difficult to achieve here in our region, because our humidity tends to vary between 40 and 60%, which is the ideal range for orchid culture. Okay, below 40 it gets down to 30 or 25. The plants will tend to desiccate. You're going to have to water them a lot more. And then if you have too high humidity, you start getting rot problems in the leaves. You can see this particular plant has got some sort of brown spots here. Those are sort of indicating fungal growth, okay, and that's exacerbated by high humidity conditions. But generally, the ambient humidity we have here is about right, so you don't have to do too much about that. Air movement, yeah, they do like, so in other words, the sort of air movement you're feeling at the moment, yeah, you get this sort of gentle breeze. You obviously don't want a gale, everything blows into the corner, but the sort of gentle breeze where the leaves move gently in the air, those are the ideal types of conditions that they like as far as air movement goes. Okay, again, because they're adapted to living in an epiphytic environment, growing on trees, there's always air movement up there. Fertilizing, again, orchids are not fast growing plants. Okay, so they will put on one of these growths a year. In other words, you can see this one here has got a new growth starting. It'll put on one of those a year, so it's not like sugarcane or beans or millies. If you plant a millie, it has to go from seed to that high in 1 year, in half a year, in fact. So it needs a lot of nutrients, a lot of sun, a lot of water. Orchids are slow growing plants. They generally put on one of these growths a year. So they don't need excessive amounts of fertilizer. A lot of people obsess about fertilizing. It's really not necessary to worry too much about fertilizing. You can just use any soluble, as a start off, you can use any soluble plant fertilizer, preferably at half the recommended strength that the manufacturer recommends, and you fertilize it every third or fourth watering. In other words, you water for 3 times, and then the 4th time you can fertilize it. And if you miss it, skip it, it doesn't matter. You don't have to obsess about fertilizing. It really isn't such a big deal, but they do need fertilizer. The biggest thing with caring for orchids is watering. And more orchids are killed by overwatering than anything else. Okay. And so orchids normally grow on trees. You will see in the show there are quite a number of examples of an orchid growing on a branch or a piece of wood. And you can see the roots are exposed to the air, and they are used to getting wet and drying out rapidly. Okay, so typically in a tropical environment, if you've ever been to places like the Amazon, or the sun will come up, it'll get quite warm, around about lunchtime it'll rain, you'll get quite a heavy rain, but by 4 or 5 o'clock at night it stops raining, the plants drip off, they dry out, and they go through this cycle throughout the rainy season. So orchid roots generally like to get wet, and then they like to dry out. Not sort of succulent dry, but they like to dry out. Then they get wet and they dry out. Okay, so we grow orchids for convenience in pots. Okay, because it's nice, compact, the thing stands there, you don't have to have a big branch. So for convenience, we grow them in pots. But you can see all of these mixes have got components that retain moisture. Okay, so if you water this plant every day, you are going to overwater it. This mix will very soon start rotting because it starts composting. Okay, like any natural biological process, it starts to break down, it starts to compost, it gets dense, it gets airless, and those roots will turn black and they will die. Okay, and orchids are tough plants. They can often live for months after all their roots are dead. And you think, oh, my plant's doing all right. Meanwhile, there's no roots, and eventually it will succumb. So you got to, all of these plants, when you water them, you have to water them, give them a good watering, let the water run through so that it flushes any salts. Again, the roots don't like a saline environment. Let the water run through. So the worst thing to do is to water this thing and then put it back on your dining room table in a drip tray. Then what happens, the drip tray fills up with water and you don't empty that, and it basically just keeps this mix wet and soggy, and your roots will die. So water them, let the water run through, let it drip off before you put it back where it is in your house or wherever it's growing. Okay, so that's why we often, you can see here, I mean, you can grow orchids on this sort of base here, stones. If that's the base of your greenhouse, that's fine, the water runs away. A lot of people have greenhouse benches, which are, you know, steel mesh or wooden slats or something like that. That's fine. You water it, it runs through, it runs out, and then it dries out. And so you leave it then for a half a week, until you think, okay, the mix is now nearly dry. Let me water it again. Okay, but don't keep on watering. Don't keep on watering. Like with any house plant, you can overwater very easily. There are a number of ways of ensuring that you don't water. For example, this Vanda here, you see these roots hang bare root here like that. That's how they like to grow in nature. And so you need to water these plants often, and when the roots are wet, they hang in the wind and they will basically dry off. But then you need to water them again and again and again. So a plant like this, you probably need to water every day. Even in winter, maybe every day, every second day, for them to get enough moisture. One trick is to grow these plants in these types of pots. I've just put it in that pot just to hold it up. But you see, this type of pot here is very open and airy. Okay, so this will dry out quite rapidly. You can see this. I watered this. This is my plant. I watered it 2 days before the show, and I just put it in here just to support it because it's a bit top heavy, but you can see how wet it still is here. Although if you look at the top, you think, oh, my plant's dry. I need to water it. If you look at the top there, you can see it's dry, but you see underneath how much moisture there is still sitting there. Okay, so if I had to water this again, it wouldn't be good, particularly in the cold weather. So that will go home at the end of the show and will dry out for a week or so before it gets more water. So you don't have to go crazy with watering orchids. They like to dry out in between. If your mix is like this, it's a biggish pot. There's a fine, you can see it grows in fine bark. I'm not sure what this is. This looks like peat moss or something like that. So this mix here will also stay wet for a long time. So again, maybe once a week to water this, even in summer, is more than adequate. So that's a big thing to be aware of. Do not overwater your plants. A little bit of dryness does them no harm. Too much wetness will kill them. Okay, so that's kind of in a nutshell. I know it's a lot to take into account, but if you just, that's why I brought all these plants out here. If you can just see, I bought one like this. Okay, so intermediate temperatures, intermediate amount of light. They like to dry out between watering. These are low light plants. They need to go into a bright shade, or these do very well in a kitchen or a bathroom. Okay, because those places are naturally more humid, and they're actually naturally a bit warmer as well. As long as you don't leave it in a draft, they will do well in that environment. Okay, nice bright window without any direct sun. There is this fallacy that goes around where you've got to put ice on these things. I mean, where that comes from, I do not know. But these plants have never seen ice. Where they come from, they have never seen a block of ice. They don't know what a block of ice is. We're not talking about the volume of water, we're talking about the frequency. So if you always just put a little bit of water in here so that it doesn't run out the bottom, what's going to happen is that water is going to evaporate and the salt level in this pot will build up. You know, because there's always some calcium, some sodium, some magnesium, sulfates, calcium, chloride. They don't evaporate when the water evaporates, they stay there. And you look at a lot of house plants, you will see there's like a white crust on the pots. That's salt buildup. So this environment's beginning more and more and more saline, and that's going to kill the roots. So when we say don't overwater, we don't overwater in frequency, but when you water it, give it a good watering, let the water run through so that it dissolves those salts, flushes them out. And the same applies to your African violets. Give them a good watering, don't just a little bit of water, because that is going to become saline and the roots are going to rot. They die. They're not used to that environment. So don't overwatering in terms of frequency, not in terms of volume. They like a lot of water. You must flush the system out. Yeah, so no ice on these guys. They don't know what ice is. Yeah, I mean, if you've got a lot of plants, you kind of have to water from the top. You know, I mean, they do say don't let the water stand in the crown. Okay, so don't let it stand overnight. But I mean, you can put it under a tap and it waters as long as at night, if there's a bit of water sitting there, you can just pour it out or take a tissue and dab it out. Because these plants particularly, they grow in nature, they grow against the side of a tree. And so these leaves actually hang down. So they drain themselves. You'll never get crown rot in a phalaenopsis in nature because the leaves hang down. They don't sit in a pot like this. So this is a kind of an artificial configuration, you see. But we do it for convenience. A lot of orchids are like that. These as well are quite susceptible. You know, the water will sit there. But what you do, you water them in the morning and let them dry out, put them in a breezy spot, and then the leaves will dry out as well. And then it'll be fine. Yeah.
Definitely submerging them is also.
You can do that, but don't do it for long, because I've also done that. And then 2 days later, wow, I've forgotten the plant there, you know. So, you know, if you can do it for an hour or two and that's enough. Then pull it out, let it drain. Don't put it in a dish which is going to hold the water. Okay, so that's where most people go wrong, is on watering. It is the most important. Okay, so fungus, like all plants, they are susceptible to fungal attack. Okay, so anybody who tries to grow roses, for example, you'll be familiar with black spot and this and that and the other, and there's a whole lot of names for these fungi, and so they do tend to be attacked by fungi, and orchids are no different. So if the foliage remains wet for too long, those are the conditions under which fungi start growing. So that's why it's important to have good air movement. So if the foliage gets wet, that's fine. It gets wet in nature as well, but the air movement will serve to dry off the foliage. Once you've got fungus, you can't stop. In other words, that's spoiled with the fungus. You can't do anything about that. That tissue is dead. You need to just cut it off. If you spray with fungicide, you're preventing further infection. You can't actually reverse a fungal infection, except by surgery, you know. So the right conditions and the right choice of plant for your conditions. So you'll find that these warm-growing plants, if they're too cold and wet, they will very quickly get attacked by fungi. And these cool-growing plants here, this one and that one, if they're wet and warm, too warm, they will they will succumb to fungus, you know. So if they're in that sort of environment that suits them, they're pretty resistant to fungus, you know. Of course, they're also more prone to fungal infection if you're growing a whole lot of them in this sort of like greenhouse type situation, because then the infection can be transferred from one to the other.
On a little bit of feed.
Yes, yeah, no, well, this is a
That's what they gave me.
yeah. Yeah, so this is a high potassium. So it is really for, as I say, you can get really wound up and thing with feeding. As I say, as an initial thing, don't get hung up with feeding. This is a low nitrogen, high potassium mix. Okay, that number there you see is 14, 11, 33. So the first number is always nitrogen. So this has got 14% nitrogen, 11% phosphorus, and 33% potassium. Okay, so these are usually what they call bloom boosters. In other words, so when a plant is building flowers, it needs more potassium. Okay, but when it's growing, it needs more nitrogen. But really, a balanced, soluble fertilizer is all you need as a start. You don't have to get too wound up by this. It's a very technical,
And Epsom salts?
well, Epsom salts is a source of magnesium. So magnesium isn't quite a trace element. Things like boron, chrome, sulfur, those are trace elements. They're needed in small quantities. It's also not a macronutrient like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It's kind of in between. Generally, if you're watering with tap water, your tap water will have magnesium in it, and it will have calcium in it. So you shouldn't need to supplement with that. If you're watering with rainwater, in other words, you collect rainwater off your roof, that should have very few salts. So there you would need to start putting magnesium in and calcium in it. But a general tap water should have enough magnesium for your plant. I mean, but if you want to, you can maybe use half a teaspoon per liter or something. But it's again it's not a macronutrient, you know. I mean, it's used in the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll, it's a magnesium compound, so they certainly need magnesium, but not in the same quantity as nitrogen. Again, don't overdo it. Thank you, guys. Thanks for supporting the show. Yeah, if there's any other questions, you know, you can come up individually.
And if there's anything that you're unsure about, just drop it in the comments box below and tell us if you like hearing advice from other orchid growers and enthusiasts and orchid experts like Jimmy. If you found any of the information in this video helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on things. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.